Hi there, and welcome back. If you've been following along, we are at step number 5 in the Vermeer exercise, which means you should be applying your third layer of glaze. And if you followed along in the reading, in that demonstration, they talk a lot about starting to neutralize some of the colors and playing with color intensity. And at this point, that means that you're going to have to make some judgment calls based on the way that your painting is reading. And we're going to make some slight deviations. Now, in that handout, he talks about using primarily the yellow ochre, a little bit of the cadmium red again, but they also talk about adding a little bit of raw or burnt umber, depending. And I think that's helpful, but I also find personally that in terms of adding kind of a nice coolness to the shadows, I want to have out a little bit of ultramarine blue. And of course, we still have our white that we're going to use to pick out the high key highlights on the face. Now, in terms of medium, I have in here Galkid. I have a little bit of linseed, about equal parts Galkid and linseed. But I've really reduced the amount of Gamsol that's in there. Someone asked if I'm painting with dilly beans. I am not. I'm just a recycler. So there's still a teeny bit of Gamsol in here, but not as much. Again, we're working fat over lean. So our initial layers are going to be very lean, which we did in our underpainting. And then we still have that Gamsol, which cuts the paint, cuts the oil out. But we're starting to work our way away from that and have a really more full-bodied pigment and work our way towards just having the linseed and then a little bit of Galkid to serve as the varnish. So, same idea as last time. Using your medium. I'm still going to pick out some yellow ochre, and I'm just going to start with a light tint. Get a little red in there. I'm feeling like my gal, she's getting a little too orange in some spots. Kind of want that sort of pink hue in some areas. And I'm just going to start with this. Now again, it's a tint. This has about 8 steps to it. I would say it's better to go and, use thinner layers and have to do more. It's easier to add more. It's really hard to walk this back once it gets too heavy. So keep it light, it dries quickly, and hey, it's a pandemic, so we've got a little bit of downtime to wait. So once you have your tint, we can start to migrate over to the camera. All right, so looking back at our image, and again, we really haven't touched the headdress or the shirt yet. If you need a break, if the face is frustrating you, by all means, read ahead and start addressing these areas. But for now, in this demo, we're still gonna focus on the face. And so, as I mentioned before, I have my tint. So I've got a really translucent layer of pigment on my brush, and I'm gonna start to brush some in. And once I have this on here, I can kind of make a more informed decision about what I need to do next. And part of the reason I encourage this, color is relative to its context. And so we're not really gonna know exactly what the face is gonna need until we have it on the canvas. And yes, this is a thunderstorm in March, so that's what you're hearing outside. Great night to be in and painting, right? So again, thin, I've got a little bit of red. I'm going to start to work in a little bit of white in those high key areas. But also I'm starting to think, these shadowed areas, and if you look at your example, right there, these cool tones in addition to these warm tones. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take like a teeny bit of blue, that ultramarine that's on my palette, and I'm going to work some onto my brush. I might pull a little bit of umber in there as well, just to keep that shadow nice and cool and dark. So it's a really thin tint. And I don't know if you can see that, right? It's very light, it's very fair. If it's too light, you can always add more, but start small. Don't just lob it on there. So I'm working a little bit of cool into this part of the face. And you can even into the shadow, it's a modestly cool shadow, so if some starts to pull into there, it's okay. Again, as you become more comfortable with this, you don't have to glaze the entire face at one time. You can start to kind of block in certain areas. I'm going to bust out a smaller brush, pull in a little bit more umber. and kind of work back into some of these areas. If it gets away from you, again, don't worry about it. We can always lift out with the rag. And this will help push back in some of those cool shadows. It's not going to bring back your value structure if you've lost that. If you've lost that initial underpainting, you're kind of stuck with what you have in terms of glazing. But it will kind of enhance and give it a more lifelike quality. Most people are not purely yellow ochre in color. And so you can see I'm starting to push in a little bit of cool, keeping it really light. Can always add another layer. And right now I'm using a sable brush. You don't have to. You could certainly use one of your hog hair brushes for this. I just like the degree of control that it allows me. Push in that shadow underneath the eye. I know for the moment it looks like maybe I just gave her a black eye. Don't worry, we're gonna knock that back. And then you can kind of take your wider brush again and just start to soften. Again, if it looks like you gave her a black eye, you can use this to kind of diffuse. All right, so still kind of orange, but I'm feeling a little bit better about the blue. Now I'm gonna take my brush, and as I said, like some of these areas, I might need a little bit more of that warm tone, that kind of cadmium red, right? She's very ochre right now. So I'm gonna work on a little bit of the red in just a few areas, kind of push it back in, get it away from just being so purely ochre. And you can see how light of a tint this is. Right, you don't need to do the entirety of the face. And yours might be in a different place. You know, mine, I think it needs to be warmed up with a teeny bit of red and then cooled down in other areas. You might find that with this step, you might need just a little bit more just tint with ochre, and that's absolutely fine. Now I'm gonna take my dry brush, my handy dandy bristle brush, and start to scumble back in a little bit of white. I don't have anything in the white paint right now, it's just white. And start to put on your makeup, put on your lifeguard sunscreen nose. Beautiful. Clearly, now I'm going to have to soften this. So now I'm taking my detail brush. You could use the wider brush for this, it's sort of a judgment call, but I'm using my sable for this part just to kind of feather it out. That'll give it like a nice soft edge. So it feels less like cakey or streaky, and a little bit more natural. And don't forget, as you're doing this, we tend to focus really heavily on the cheeks. I'm going to go back in and get the lids on the eyes too, because it's really easy to kind of miss those. They're a little bit less dominant, but they're very important to capturing the form. And you can start to see with that little bit of pink and that little bit of blue, she's starting to feel a little more naturalistic. Again, not done yet, but the color is feeling less intense and a little bit more believable and less creepy. Now working that white into the eyes, dry brush, brush that right back in. And if you think about the eyelids, if they're starting to get lost, think about them as shapes. That's why I'm using my angle brush for this, is I can really make a quick directional mark and kind of pull it so that they don't start to feel flat. We will start to work some color back into the eyes. We're going to glaze some tint in. Right now I'm just worried more about the actual planes of the face, and then we'll come back to getting that color into the eyes. Alright, so we've been working on this for a little bit. I'm just kind of doing some finishing touches for this layer. Bringing a little bit of warmth into the lips again. And as I said, now because we've got a little bit of ultramarine out, you can start to play with kind of cooling some shadows too. So after I get this red in, I might be inclined to just pop in just like a teeny bit of ultramarine back into some of the shadows in the lips. And be careful it doesn't pool, especially the red. If this starts to pool, it's gonna look like she's got a bloody lip, which is not what we're going for. All right, so I've got my tint down, dry brush in, a little bit of that white highlight. Same with the top, they don't need quite as much. And the top lip is usually in shadow, right? So what I'm gonna do for this top lip is at some point, after I get this white where I want it, I'm gonna kick in just a teeny bit of ultramarine right in the bottom, just to keep it kind of cool. And again, a little goes a long way, and this is a slow process, so by all means keep it light. And if the teeth start to get away from you, just knock in a little bit of ultramarine and a little bit of that burnt umber color, just to kind of keep that sort of shadowed quality. We can always bring a highlight right back out, but this will keep it from looking like her teeth are glowing. All right, so I'm just gonna keep working on this for a little bit, just tighten it up, and then she'll be good to dry for about 24 hours, and then we'll talk about the next layer.